Customers come to financial services and sometimes see a lot of firms as dinosaurs because they just haven't kept up with the pace of change in other industries.
Welcome to the Digital Customer Communications podcast, where we discover how leading companies engage, retain, and delight customers at scale. In this episode, we're joined by Ben Hammond, MD of Consulting and Insight at the Langcat. Ben shares his insights on how digital customer communications have evolved and what it means to humanise these interactions, particularly in highly regulated industries. Thanks for joining us, Ben.
Pleasure to be here, Sam.
With your nearly 20 years of experience, not to make you feel old, in financial services, how have you seen the approach to customer communications evolve, particularly in kind of making them more human or less human and relatable?
I think it's actually been just over 20 years ago. Sorry, 20 years now, but I'll take that. It's changed a lot, but also not quite enough. I think the summary point is, things have moved on, and this is sort of in particular in the last 5 years, and this is across the board, not just financial services. Things have moved on a lot. Firms have then kind of been quite quick to pick things up, but then maybe the development has then slowed down a bit. So, I mean, in summary, we're sort of seeing a lot less paper, for example. So you talk about digital communications, the main thing in our industry is financial services is trying to get rid of paper. It feels like it should be a simple thing to do, but not everyone's very good at it, or you go at it quite hard, and then actually there's been even some sort of people, taking a step back for compliance or regulatory reasons. I'm sure we'll get onto some of that. So overall, lots of change. It's sort of fast and slow, bit of a mix there. But overall, I think the financial services industry, especially sort of what I deal with, which is a lot of investment platforms, investment managers, wealth managers, that sort of they've become a lot more accessible to users, and this is advisors as well as customers. All their users. So lots of good change. I think there's still plenty more to come, and we're seeing a lot of new technologies now that are really going to sort of take things to the next level, if you like. But one of the things where I think there's a lot of debate about, and this goes sort of from a regulatory point of view as well, is exactly how far can you go down the digital route without it, or without advisors and customers getting a bad deal, if you like. So, I'll say consumer duty. I've not said it yet today, but there's a lot going on there again about, good client outcomes and no customer detriment and the whole value for money debate. And a lot of that is only going to come with a sort of a full adoption of a digital suite of products, and that goes for the underlying tech as well as the communications. So I think just sort of summary to open this, there's a lot's happened. We are definitely moving away from paper, but there's still a lot more to do there.
Yeah. So you mentioned a couple of things there. One was the digitization has kind of happened in the majority of cases. In some cases, they backstepped from that a little bit, but in the majority of cases, it's the digitization has happened. There are digital tools, there are digital platforms and services. Maybe the pace of change hasn't kept up with other industries in terms of that humanization. And, we could talk about humanization in terms of segmentation, personalisation, hybrid advice. What does humanising digital comms mean to you? Because it's not just being digital, is it? It's going that extra step further.
Yeah. So I mean, we would probably look at it from sort of two angles. One is sort of the digitalisation of the stuff underneath, if you like, so sort of the process and getting things done quickly on an automated basis. So a couple of examples there would be, and I talked about in the last 5 years, so since the beginning of the pandemic, moving from wet signatures on a piece of paper to digital signatures. Everyone was very quick to, whack DocuSign into their process or Adobe or whatever it might be. But actually then after a couple of years, they almost like withdrew some of that and had a proper think about it, but it kind of then went back a little bit. So there's that underlying process, which in other industries, users have just got used to. So, I'll talk about Amazon because everyone talks about Amazon and Apple and things like that, but you just expect things to flow very quickly, be intuitive, don't really have to think or use a user manual about how to do anything. It just works. And that's what people expect in financial services, and it often is just not there. So there's that kind of background piece, plus the bit on top, so the overall or the total user experience. And customers come to financial services and sometimes see a lot of firms as as dinosaurs because they just haven't kept up with the pace of change in other industries. So what we're then seeing is a lot of change driven by just what other people expect from other industries. So, there's a lot of AI tools and robotics, and you talked about hybrid advice. I'll come back to that in a moment. There's a lot out there that people then sort of expect to see develop, but there's actually some issues that need fixing by some of this stuff. So it's not just overall giving a better experience or making things a bit easier on the eye for customers, or it just happens quicker. And as I said, it's very intuitive, but actually fixing things in the industry. So we've got this thing called the advice gap. Most people have heard about the advice gap, which is, I'm going to say partially, but I think most people would say entirely driven by regulation or regulatory change. But for the good and the bad, there's a good balance to be had there. But the more change that needs to happen, or the more sort of regulation that happens and what have you, it does two things. It takes advisors away from being able to talk to customers. And don't get me wrong, you need to make sure the customers looked after, their money is safe, there's no customer detriment, they're getting a good level of service, but there's just less time to spend with them there. And so you really need the technology to help bridge some of that gap. So I'll say advice gap. A lot of people don't agree with the term, but the bridging that advice gap is a very, very important thing to do. And some regulation is unfortunately, making that a little bit worse. Some of our recent research from this year actually sort of proves that we've been speaking to customers and consumers. So it's really kind of, things have moved on, sometimes quite quickly, especially in other industries. Everyone expects financial services to be going at the same pace. It's never that easy. And actually, we need some of this new technology to really come along and help bridge some of that gap and help advisors and customers get a good experience overall.
Is regulation always at odds with technological innovation, or is some of the regulation actually helping to drive innovation?
Again, it's probably a bit of a mix. So there are some good initiatives out there. I think Labour announced something about their new innovation committee or whatever a few days ago. So that could well help. There's the FCA's, sandbox environment, their sort of sandbox setup that's been going for, 5, 6, 7 years now, probably. And I've seen a lot of firms come through that and things actually launch. So that's kind of a safe environment. They're encouraging some of this to actually happen. So that's good. But ultimately, it needs some forward thinkers who have maybe come out of, let's just say, a big life co that dealing with, back books of customers, that it's completely paper-based environment, basically. And they can see, well, there's an obvious gap here, and what can we do to help solve some of these issues in the industry? I'm going to branch out on my own and go and help solve that problem. So we ran an event in the summer we called the Catwalk, where we had 25 applications for 5, Dragon's Den style spaces for people to come and demo their tech to help fix some of these issues. And there's a massive variety of what's happening in there, but it really does need sort of the forward thinkers to not quite challenge the regulator, but maybe work with that and say, okay, here's the rules, here's what we've got to adhere to, but actually, where can we help bridge some of that gap, be it the advice gap or anything else, some of that technology gap, whilst meeting the regulatory rules. But then how you actually get that through into a customer and advisor environment then becomes a little bit tricky. So you don't have to be a regulated business to do a lot of this stuff, to run some of this technology. But as soon as maybe a firm wants to use it, so one of the big investment managers or platforms or whoever it might be wants to use some of this, that's obviously another hurdle to sort of get over, because you do then have to start dealing with customer data, for example. And that's one of the other big things is there's so much data in our industry, and actually having that in the right place and harnessing it and surfacing it to the customers in the right way, in a digital way, is quite a challenge sometimes as well.
So there's a lot of underlying bureaucracy, a lot of compliance, a lot of admin, but in terms of customer expectation, how can we move away from these internal pressures? How can we use these internal pressures to create an environment that still has an eye on that customer expectation and the customer experience, and again isn't creating platforms that are robotic and are limited by compliance and regulation, but are human and do feel Apple-esque and Amazon-esque?
I'll come back to the digital bit in a moment, but I was just going to sort of link in that back into the regulatory part, I suppose. So that sort of balance between compliance and regulation and the communication, it can sometimes have a really good effect. So I'll go back to consumer duty I mentioned a few moments ago. So we do big annual surveys and that sort of thing. Actually, the top thing, and this is almost 50% of advisors saying this, is something like consumer duty has made them change the way they communicate with their clients. Now, I don't necessarily mean the method, but the way that they are actually being more in contact with their clients or identifying different needs. Sometimes it is, well, I've always been doing it well, but actually it's just made me have a little rethink about my business, and I'm just going to change a few things that actually I think enhances what I'm doing for my clients. And that's a really good thing. It might also be that actually they think, oh, here's where I'm going to focus my business. And unfortunately, I think I've now got too many clients, so I'm going to have to, focus in a slightly different area. That's where some of sort of the issues come in, and we go back to the advice gap piece. And so it might just be the customer contact as well. But then how you actually sort of get around that and then think, how can I service some of these customers who maybe don't want to see me every 6 months or even 12 months? They just want a lighter touch approach. That's where some of the digital communication stuff definitely comes back in. And advisors, be they small, medium, large, big networks, whatever it might be, will then start looking to some of these newer technologies as well. So you mentioned earlier about hybrid advice, for example. So, robo advice, robo 3.0, whatever, that's gone. I think we're into a hybrid or augmented, as some people call it, advice type of environment. But even then, it's really difficult to get it right, because customers, they might think they want something that's purely digital to start with, but it's very hard for, us in the industry or the advisor or even the customer themselves to sort of identify, well, when do I need a bit more help and to actually speak to someone? So then it comes back to the firms and the investment platforms, whoever it might be, to design that process in the right way, whilst, meeting the client needs, but also adhering to regulations as well. So getting that sort of balance is really difficult. There's some good sort of purer technology firms that have been around for quite a while now who have built some of that up. But very much the pure, I'm going to go on, answer a few questions, be able to invest 10 grand in my ISA this year, that sort of purer piece, unless you're doing it on a direct basis without any help, I think has kind of fallen away. What people are looking for is, that's fine for a period, but I always want to be able to speak to someone if I need to. And that goes back to other industries as well. You will be able to do something. I'll use the Amazon example. 99.9% of the time, you're probably ordering something and it's absolutely fine. Every now and again, you actually want to speak to someone, be it online or on the phone, to sort out a couple of issues. So we're never going to go fully digital. And I think of financial services, that it's a larger proportion of people who actually still very much want that human touch when the time is right.
You've mentioned robo advice there. You mentioned, tools that might be able to fix the advice gap, some of these issues. Are there any specific tools or tech that you've seen come along that are really starting to change things, or you think might change things? A
few examples. I think where we've seen the most impact is probably when you combine some of these tools. In a pure direct-to-consumer world, I think a lot of it is around sort of the education part. So the tool might be, answering a few. You've got to be very careful here from an FCA point of view and everything else. But, if you can kind of have a decision tree type process that the customer can go down, where it's not giving them any type of recommendation, but it's just then surfacing information, sometimes that's enough, because people, especially the younger generation, they like to do their own research, they like to shop around and what have you. They might then just see an advert on the tube or something and go, right, I know that one, that's made me make my decision, away I go, I'm going to invest in my ISA this year, whatever it might be. But then they'll also want the ability to use a chatbot or something like that, or just to chat to someone online, maybe just to check some details. So it's not advice, but it's just helping them through that process. So that's kind of the pure direct part. When it then, you bring sort of the advisor back in, even if the advisor was very, very light touch, and this is again for the more, like I say, the younger generation, but that just tends to be where it sits at the moment. The advisor is going to need good support from their CRM and their back office system and how their data is arranged, so that maybe when a lead is coming in or something's coming in via the website, they can just send out some information or offer to call the customer if they need help. But otherwise, you go for it. I'm here if you need the support. So there's that kind of very light touch environment. You then kind of move into this sort of hybrid advice type world, and there's plenty of firms out. I'll say plenty. There's probably a handful of firms doing that successfully. But over the years, there's probably been 200 plus, robo advisors across the world at least. And we very quickly see people come into and out of the UK and withdrawing back into Europe and America. So there's an awful lot going there. Some of them have sort of kept on going, and those ones tend to then be bought up by some of the larger firms who are maybe looking to bridge that gap. So there's a lot there, a lot around the data, and then actually the analytics that sits behind that as well. So if you're a larger company who's maybe identified a gap and said, right, I'm going to go and partner with or even buy one of these, hybrid advice firms or the technology firms, you then need to say, okay, well, that's great. I've got all these customers over here who I really want to help at the moment, or, they've been with us a while, or they've had 20-year-old policies, but we want to get them re-engaged with them. How do you do that? It then all comes down to the data. So if your data is not in a good format and then sort of looked at in a good way or structured in a good way, you then can't take advantage of the newer technologies out there. So it's all very well having something that's all singing, all dancing, nice and shiny from a digital engagement point of view. But if you can't actually, match that up with your data and then go out and speak to your customers and make the best use of it, it's not quite useless. It's good for new customers, but you're not making the best use of it really. So it's all, having the good stuff over here, great, but you also need to think about what you've got within your existing business and all that data to make it work effectively for you.
Yeah, and if there were legitimate fears about the advice guidance boundary in making decision trees and things like that, then with the rise of AI and automation, there are a lot more fears around that. How do you see AI as something that can detract from the experience, from the customer experience, or will it benefit these interactions?
I think overall it should benefit, but it sort of depends what different people mean by AI, because there are quite a few who would sort of look at something and think, oh, that's AI, and it's not. It's a sort of a simple, decision tree type process or something like that, which is a little bit different. But to be some of the firms who are then, so I've seen a couple of firms who are maybe putting their own stuff on top of ChatGPT, for example, and say, I'll come back to the data part and sort of privacy and that sort of stuff in a moment. But there's one firm who is using ChatGPT and sort of the models, the large LLM models underneath, but actually you can't have the data going anywhere near it. So you need to have that level of separation. So maybe using a third party for the more complex stuff, because they're expert. I'm using ChatGPT as an example, but they're experts over here. We're experts here. How can we kind of bring the two technologies together? I think that's what people are starting to look at. But when it comes to customers thinking, oh, is that AI or not? A lot of the time it isn't. But in terms of how it will help fix some of the issues, I think it definitely will. It's just a little bit too early now. So again, there's a lot of firms out there doing a lot of interesting things. But actually, if you think about how you can sort of harness the customers and ultimately, make it a successful business, because you're going to be out there looking for investment from VC firms and PE and that sort of thing. And they're going to want to make it work. They're going to want payback on their investment. So they're going to be looking for the practical applications of some of these new technologies, be they AI or not. So again, that's where it comes back to looking at how you get access to the data or use the best of both worlds in a ChatGPT and that side of things as well. And then ultimately, how can you get larger companies or larger firms to use your technology to help them with their customers as well.
So with the rise of AI, there are a lot of tools coming onto the market that are about keeping your data compliant, managing databases at scale for that kind of front end purpose. Are there any other sort of trends in tech that you see in digital customer comms in financial services or more widely in regulated industries?
Maybe one of the other things is sort of how that information is then presented. So I mean, if you go back to the paper days, then you'd get reams and reams of paper and fact sheets and reports and things like that. And there might be a little graph at the top, but otherwise it'd just be rows and rows of data and how much your investments have grown or whatever it might be. People aren't really interested in that level of granularity. They want to know, I said I wanted to do this, here's my goals, give me a nice graphic that shows how far I am towards meeting those goals or something like that. So they might have answered the questions and gone through AI or not, but a hybrid advice process, let's go back to that term, and they think, right, fine, but actually they'll then want much more regular access to something. I mean, don't be looking at your pension every day, but at the same time, I want to be able to dip in, dip out, see how my investments are doing, see a nice graph with, how much am I towards my goal, that sort of thing, be able to get into the detail if I want, maybe read a few interesting articles, a bit about financial education as well, because again, a lot of these technologies, as I was saying at the beginning there, also, I mean, they're aimed at all customers, but they need to be structured differently for different cohorts of customers, different ages of customers. So again, for some of the younger generations, you want everything now and on demand and all the rest of it. If I can click around, look at some stuff, delve into the data, read an article and what have you, that interactive environment is going to be really important. Whereas maybe for someone who's already in retirement, so in their 60s and 70s, yes, they might want to log in and just look at things, but if you present them with too much information on a page, they might just switch off. So you've got to do your user testing, I suppose, is the other thing. Test what you're doing with your customer base and segment your customer base properly. And this is whether you're an advisor, platform investment manager, anyone really, and do the testing properly and then adjust things as you go. So it then comes back to that constant feedback loop. Again, some customers will be more interested in that. So you can send out a survey or, can you score us and what have you. You'll always get the people who are like, always, I know I am, I'm sort of always quite keen to go, well, I want to congratulate someone if they've done something well, or if they've done something wrong, I'm like, well, that's really frustrating. I want to help them fix it. So I'll always be getting involved in that sort of stuff. So it's definitely worth going out to your customer base to kind of test what you're doing on a continuous basis, make sure it's still relevant as well.
And often if you ask customers, they don't actually know what they would do in a testing environment. If you say, how likely would you be to purchase X if this happened? I don't know.
No.
I don't know till I'm in that situation.
Exactly.
And you have to test it with those demographics because like you say, you get people navigate websites now in ways that you would never expect them to. If you look at heat maps of websites, the speed at which they browse through a website and don't consume all the information that you've lovingly put together.
That's exactly it. You just need the key things to be in front of you, or to be able to access them quickly. So, I want to just scroll down to here, or there's a quick link down, or there's a quick menu, or whatever it might, or, a nice breadcrumb along the top so I can navigate around. That's become even more important. You're absolutely right. It's that instant access to what I want to see now. And actually, if you can make it, again, there are third-party firms out there who will come and, build you a nice dashboard on top of everything that you've got. You might have 3 or 4 different parts of your business. Some are more digital than others. They'll come and build you a nice dashboard, which is kind of a first point of entry, if you like. Customer goes there, gets a quick view, and then they can decide what they need to do and what sort of level of detail they want to go into.
Yeah, and that layering is something that we are able to do with digital communications, but then you have the other side of, well, if you can do, hierarchies among hierarchies, then you can make it infinitely much more complex than it needs to be. So there's such a balance. I think we need to let you go, but where can we find you? Can we find you anywhere online?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. So on LinkedIn, all the usual social channels. So our website is the Lancat, I should say, .co.uk. We run various events as well throughout the year. So we had one in Scotland last week. We've got one in coming up in February. And for any advisors listening, we're about to go back into the field with our big annual survey as well, which is looking at sort of, advisor sentiment and customer sentiment throughout the industry. Helps us develop our work. But it also, we do a big report in February, which really sort of explains, what we think is going on in the industry, what the trends are, and what we expect to see in the future as well. So I'm sure you'll post some details, but please do get in touch if you've got any further questions.
Yeah, great stuff. Well, until then, thanks, Ben. We'll speak soon.
Thanks, Sam. Nice to speak to you.